In the winter of 2020, a disturbing video from Venezuela began circulating the internet. In it, a young girl sits cross-legged on her bed. She's shaking, her face is contorting, and she is dangerously malnourished. This video was recorded by the girl's own father in a desperate cry for help. His 15-year-old daughter, Naryeli, had suddenly fallen into this mysterious illness, and no doctor could figure out what was wrong with her. Her family became desperate to help her, and so they consulted a priest, who very seriously told them that their daughter had been possessed by evil spirits. Someone had done witchcraft on her that had sent her into this deathly state. Naryeli's family rushed her to a spiritual center where healers worked on her day and night, trying to break the evil curse that was very quickly killing her. But tragically, after 9 days of spiritual cleansing, Naryeli would lose her life to this mysterious, sudden illness, leaving a million questions to be answered. Who could have done this to Naryeli? And how could they have done this? And why? But on the day of her funeral, one person would step forward with the answers to all of those questions, and it would shock everyone. So, thank God it's Freaky Friday. Today we're covering the haunting and shockingly twisted case of Naryeli Cacharuco Guillén, the 15-year-old girl whose frightening final recording will now circulate the internet, probably forever. This series is intended for educational purposes, to document mysteries, historical events, and amplify important conversations. All opinions stated are mine alone. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to thank our sponsor for making this video possible, June's Journey. So many of you already know how close me and June are. Me and June's journey go way back. And you know, after being a deep dive detective on YouTube for the past 6 years or something crazy, it's obvious that I genuinely really enjoy the puzzle and the challenge of piecing together a mystery and solving it. So it's no surprise that I absolutely adore June's Journey, and because you're here too, I have a feeling that you'll enjoy it just as much as I do. In this game, you step into the role of a detective, a woman named June Parker who is trying to solve the murder of her own sister. Your task is to find hidden objects and uncover clues in hundreds of beautifully crafted scenes, each dripping with that 1920s glitz and glamour. I mean, it's giving Gatsby. And each clue that you discover brings you closer to uncovering June's family secrets and solving her sister's murder. This game has it all. It has diverse characters, engaging storylines, that haunting mystery vibe. There's even a little element of the game where you get to customize, remodel, and fix up your very own mansion and garden. I love a creative little side quest. I love when a game has something that I can personalize and make my own. And honestly, June's Journey is like my go-to wind down game when I need to relax, especially when I'm still in detective mode. I mean, I'm gonna play it as soon as I finish recording this episode. I think it's just the most ideal game to get me to relax because it still has that like spooky, mysterious, suspenseful vibe, but without being scary. And that is one of the most important things for me because you might think, looking at my channel, that I like scary, but I don't. I'm more into like the detective side of things. And especially when I'm playing a game where I want to relax and wind down, I don't want to be scared. And June's Journey doesn't scare me. It doesn't scare me, but it does really grip me. I really am like on the edge of my seat trying to like solve these mysteries. So if you want to try out June's Journey, and I really recommend you do because it's great, you can download it for free right now using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. Woo! So thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video. I love you guys, and I ain't never gonna stop loving you guys. Now, with all that being said, I do need to give you some content warnings for this case because, as always, we're going to be covering a number of very sensitive topics, including discussion around dramatic weight loss, murder, cannibalism, and religious rituals, so viewer discretion is advised. I also quickly want to mention before we even start that the dates and events in this case are really hard to pin down. There's a lot of conflicting reports that say different things, so our research team have been working overtime on this one, and we have done our best to compile the most reported and most reliable timeline possible. Now, with all that being said, let's get into the haunting case of Naryeli Cacharuco, the girl who some say was cursed to death. In 2020, at the start of the new year in Venezuela, what was a peaceful funeral has just erupted into chaos. Everyone has gathered outside of the church, and one person is being surrounded, cornered by a bunch of angry mourners. People are shouting, crying, yelling at this person. People have their phones out recording, demanding a confession for what they believe this person had done. Killed the very girl whose funeral they were all attending that day. Naryeli Cacharuco Guillén was only 15 years old when she was laid to rest. She was born in 2005 in La Guaira, a city in Venezuela, which is full of beaches, it's got a huge shipping port, and her family specifically lived in San Telmo, which is a neighborhood within La Guaira. She grew up the youngest of two daughters. Her father was named Jose and her mother was named Andri. The girls were raised Roman Catholic. Her parents were actually very devout and they attended church regularly. But for Naryeli, her big passion was sports. She was a very active, athletic little girl. And even at the age of 15, Jose and Andri knew that they had a party girl on their hands. Her dad said that if she wasn't playing sports, she would probably be on her way to a party. And I'm not entirely sure what like the young person party culture is like in Venezuela. If it's anything like England, then maybe she was drinking in a field, but I don't know, maybe that's very specific to my country. Naryeli had this beautiful long brown hair, this really big grin in every photo of her, and she always had a Snapchat filter on. I mean, she was in that era of teenagers that never took the damn dog filter off, and I was one of them. She was just your typical teenage girl, doing teenage girl things and experiencing a lot of things for the very first time in her life. And it was around this time of like teenage excitement in 2019 when she attended a party and met a boy that she went on to date a few times over the coming months. This wasn't anything serious. She was just seeing this boy. They were just going on dates. She hadn't even told her parents about him. He wasn't officially her boyfriend, I don't think. It was more just like a first little romance. I don't know. The category was cute and unserious. And not long after meeting this guy in early 2019, Naryeli made a new friend when a girl named Stephanie moved onto her street. Stephanie had just moved into a rented apartment. She was only renting it for 1 month, and this apartment was only a few doors down from where Naryeli lived. So I guess because of this close proximity, the girls saw each other a few times and just became friends. They struck up a friendship. Stephanie was 20 years old. She was living alone in this rented apartment all by herself, and of course Naryeli was 15. They were in very different stages of their life. But Naryeli really liked this 5-year age gap. To her, it was quite cool that this grown adult woman wanted to be friends with her and wanted to teach her things and be kind of like a mentor for her. But even though Naryeli thought this was really cool, her parents thought it was a little bit weird. They just couldn't really understand what this 20-year-old wanted with their 15-year-old daughter. They didn't really know what they would have in common, you know. But as the time went on and Naryeli kept talking about how amazing Stephanie is and how much she likes spending time with her, her parents just quickly accepted that this friendship was here to stay. And actually, Naryeli's parents ended up really liking Stephanie. They really trusted her, again, like a mentor for their kid. It was kind of like having another older sister to guide her and direct her in life and help her overcome her issues and ask questions to, like, I don't know, her parents were grateful to have Stephanie in their daughter's life. But then her month of renting this apartment came to an end and she had to move away. Naryeli was upset by this, but the two of them promised that they would stay in contact, they would remain friends. After Stephanie had moved away, she would come back quite often, even staying over at Naryeli's house most weekends for sleepovers. It even got to the point these girls were so close where Stephanie began calling Naryeli's parents mum and dad. The two girls are just spending so much time together. They're always messing around and taking photos, of course with the Snapchat filter on, and it kind of got to the point where everyone forgot about this age gap between them because they did seem so similar. All of those initial concerns that her parents had dissipated by this point. Like I said, they really trusted Stephanie, almost like an older sister for their daughter. Another older sister, because she did have her own biological older sister, but Stephanie was like just another one, a bonus sister. But then, one day in December 2019, the two girls asked if they could go to the beach. And of course, the answer was yes, as it always was, because Naryeli's parents trusted her in the presence of Stephanie. But little did her parents know, the stuff that those girls would be getting up to on that beach, her parents wouldn't have been happy with her. Well, they did all the normal stuff that a couple of girls would do on the beach. You know, they gossiped, they had snacks, played games, maybe had a little dip in the water, and then they practiced witchcraft. A little bit rogue, I know, but there's something I need to tell you about Stephanie, and that's that her and Naryeli didn't follow the same religion. Of course, Naryeli and all of her family were devout Roman Catholic. It's the largest branch of Christianity. It's practiced throughout the world. But Stephanie was a member of the Santeria religion. So, shall we do a little lesson on Santeria? For those of you that might not know what it is more than just a sublime song, which, by the way, I haven't been able to get out of my head for the last few days while researching this video. I don't practice Santeria. I ain't got no crystal ball. So, it's basically a religion that is reported to have begun in Cuba, and its traditions originate from the Yoruba people of West Africa. The religion was born out of slavery, when people were taken and forced to follow the same Catholicism that their master would have. So, the Yoruba people kind of blended their homeland traditions and this enforced Catholicism together to create Santeria, and it spread across South America from there. Now that's obviously a very simplified way of explaining the religion. It is much more complex and nuanced than that, but that is just the general gist of it. And the Santeria religion involves a lot of ceremonies and predictions and warnings. And within Santeria, it's not uncommon to hear about some more controversial practices happening. Things like witchcraft and darker magic, where animals are sacrificed and deals with the dead are made. And because of this, Stephanie is often referred to as a bruja, which in English just means witch. But in South America, bruja being used to describe following alternative faiths like Santeria is a controversial term. Some people like to call themselves brujas, but other people think that the term is outdated, or maybe it's negative, or even too broad, because it does group together a lot of different religions and practices, people that practice different things together under one umbrella just because a form of witchcraft is involved. For example, there are brujas that do not want to pray to a god that is a man, so instead they work on their inner spirituality and their connection to femininity. They pray to female-centered gods. Some people become brujas as a form of resistance to colonialism and slavery when their ancestors were banned from praying to spirits. People practice these sort of alternative spiritual religions not only for inner peace, but also as a sense of empowerment. And Naryeli was really interested in Stephanie's practices and all of her knowledge about witchcraft. Of course, it had never really been anything Naryeli had dipped her toe into. In fact, I think her family would not have been happy if she had. So now she's learning about all of this taboo stuff from her older best friend, and she thinks it's all kind of cool. Stephanie had already begun teaching Naryeli the basics of Santeria, and the two of them had been doing rituals and ceremonies for a little bit of time at this point. And so that day on the beach, Stephanie was still teaching Naryeli the ropes, and they were doing these quite like low stakes prayers and rituals. Of course, this whole time, Naryeli's parents had no idea that their daughter was dabbling or learning about all of this stuff, and if they had known, I can't help but think that Naryeli wouldn't have fallen victim to what Stephanie had in store for her. On the beach in December 2019, the girls were practicing their usual low-stakes rituals and prayers, and on this specific day, they were asking the spirits to protect them from evil. Stephanie had made Naryeli a friendship bracelet, and she tied it around her wrist, promising that while ever she wore that bracelet, it would protect her. The spirits would protect her from evil. Later that day, when the girls returned home, nothing really seemed amiss, apart from her father did notice when the two girls walked in, they both had their hands crossed in front of them, almost like they were wearing handcuffs. Well, invisible handcuffs. And Jose didn't think too much of it at the time. I mean, I don't know, sometimes kids are weird and they do weird things, like, it didn't seem like it was harmful. But then things just kind of kept getting weirder. That weekend was the first weekend in ages that Stephanie hadn't slept over at their house, and these girls were quite inseparable, so it was a little bit of a shock that she wasn't staying. But then it was after Stephanie left that Andre, Naryeli's mother, noticed the bracelet. She immediately recognized that this bracelet on her daughter's wrist was a symbol of witchcraft. And of course, being Roman Catholic, she was horrified to see this on her daughter. She grabbed her daughter's wrist and demanded an explanation. And Naryeli was quite confused. She was saying, "No, Mom, don't worry. Stephanie gave me it. It's just to protect me from evil." But Naryeli's mum knew that Stephanie had lied to her daughter about what the purpose of that bracelet really was. That kind of bracelet wasn't for protection. It was actually cursed. That kind of bracelet was known to be used in dark witchcraft, and seeing it wrapped around her daughter's wrist, it absolutely terrified Andre. In a panicked rage, she ripped this bracelet off her daughter's wrist and threw it in the bin, and told her never to accept any gifts or bracelets or anything from Stephanie ever again. Her mother was beyond horrified to discover this side to Stephanie, someone that she had welcomed into her Roman Catholic home, someone that she had trusted and allowed to form such a close bond with her 15-year-old, had been trying to curse her. But none of them could have even imagined just how much Naryeli's life was about to be consumed by that darkness. Later that evening, when Naryeli went up to her bedroom, she would find herself trapped due to a mysterious sudden illness that had infected her body. It was the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, when Naryeli first woke up feeling majorly sick. She was finding it really hard to swallow or keep any food down without throwing it back up, and so she decided that she would rest for a few days, hoping that she would feel better. But feeling better never came. By New Year's Eve, she was dangerously underweight, and she couldn't get out of bed. She could barely hold herself up. She didn't have that kind of energy. But she tried to push herself to get out of bed, and when she did, she collapsed onto the ground and passed out. Her parents rushed her to the hospital, but according to reports, there were no doctors available at all to see Naryeli. The hospital was very busy and very understaffed, and we'll get more into the healthcare situation in Venezuela a bit further on into the video because it does explain why there were no doctors. But her and her family are sitting in the hospital for hours waiting to hopefully be seen by someone, but no one was coming free. There were no doctors. And it had gotten to the point eventually where Naryeli felt recovered from her fainting spell, the whole reason that she had been brought to the hospital, and there were so many more people in that hospital that needed more urgent attention, and so Naryeli and her family just gave up seeking help. But it was like that fainting spell on New Year's Eve changed Naryeli completely. Because when she woke up, her family noticed a very distinct change in her temperament. Her behaviour was growing unrecognizable. Over the next 2 days after she had passed out, Naryeli had grown insanely aggressive, to the point where she had actually left her mother with bruises. It was weird because even though she had lost so much weight and she looked so visibly frail, it seemed like she had grown like weirdly physically strong. She had superhuman strength. And by this point, she had also stopped speaking altogether. Naryeli hadn't only become a completely different person physically just to look at, but also mentally. This wasn't their daughter. Something was so seriously wrong, and her family was running out of time to save her from this rapid decline. 2 days after she had fainted on New Year's Eve, it was January 2nd, and she was finally seen by 2 different doctors who came out to the house to do all sorts of tests on her. Blood tests, other tests, I don't know, just indicating all the different levels of different things in her body to try and diagnose what was going on. But when all of the results of all of these tests came back, doctors couldn't find anything medically wrong with this girl. There was nothing in her results or in her levels that would indicate or diagnose why on earth all of these different symptoms are happening all alongside each other. Remember, she can barely swallow, she can't keep food down, she's stopped talking, she is going really aggressive with superhuman strength, she has no energy in her body, she's shaking, her face is kind of like contorting. There are so many different aspects of her physical and mental well-being that are being affected by something, and doctors cannot figure it out, which is such a scary concept. There was no immediate diagnosis that doctors could come to. I mean, they could tell that she was dangerously underweight. She had been losing weight quite rapidly, actually, while she hadn't been able to swallow. She hadn't been able to keep food down. But the doctors actually did find one strange thing in the results of their tests. But bear with me, because we're going to come back to this a little bit later. Point is, at the time of their visit, the doctors couldn't really do anything for Naryeli. They told her parents to keep trying to feed her because obviously her weight was concerning. They said she should be on a liquid diet, as high calorie as possible, and that would have the best chance of staying in her system. But even that, she would just throw it right back up. She could barely even swallow and keep down water, which is even more concerning. Her parents were just so scared because imagine that. Imagine having 2 doctors come round and look at your gravely ill daughter and they say, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to save her. And so, in a desperate attempt to try and get some answers and some help for his daughter, Naryeli's father, Jose, decided to film a video that displayed all of her varying symptoms. In the video, Naryeli is sitting on her bed. She is visibly malnourished. Her long, thick hair is now very thin in strands. She's shaking her leg, and although she's not making any noise at all, her mouth keeps moving. Her face is contorting. Her jaw is gurning. It's honestly a really distressing video. I can't even imagine how terrifying it must have been to watch your own daughter become so suddenly and mysteriously unwell. And on top of that, you have doctors saying that they don't know what's wrong. They can't even diagnose, never mind treat. It would feel so hopeless. You would try anything. And that is what they did. Jose shared this video that he had taken of all of his daughter's symptoms with his own father, who shared it with his priest, who believed that he could diagnose what was going on with Naryeli. This priest believed that this 15-year-old girl was a victim of witchcraft. She was possessed. Her mother's worst nightmare had come true. The priest advised Naryeli's family to get the curse cleansed from their daughter as quickly as possible, and so they decided to take her to the nearest spiritual centre. Over the course of the next 10 days, Naryeli was subjected to so many different types of rituals and cleansings and treatments at this centre. in an attempt to save her life. This really was their last resort, last option. So let's talk a little bit about what these kind of spiritual healing centers would have been doing, because actually a lot of them are very different to each other, but they are quite popular amongst Venezuelans. The specific one that Naryeli's family took her to practiced cleansing and healing. And one ritual that this specific center was quite famous for was ridding people of evil spirits and things attached to them by giving them midnight baths in the river. Supposedly, this river is linked to healing powers. It can save the most sick and possessed and diseased people in the world. So, every night at midnight, Naryeli would have been put into this river to try to cleanse the curse away. But no matter how hard everyone tried to save Naryeli and get some answers, in the end, nothing could be done. On Saturday, January 11th, 2020, Naryeli died in her mum's arms in her childhood bedroom at home. She was surrounded by her family, surrounded by love. Now that Naryeli had passed and a death certificate needed to be made, they needed to figure out what her cause of death was, but, they couldn't figure out anything up until this point. So eventually, it was decided that her cause of death was due to cardiac arrest induced by pneumonia and malnourishment. Around the time that she died, it could have even been the day that Naryeli died, apparently, Stephanie turned up on her parents' doorstep. It's almost like she knew, but she couldn't have known because the news wasn't public. Only her very immediate close family knew that Naryeli had passed. But Stephanie appears at the front door saying that she'd heard this devastating news, and Jose and Andre didn't think too much of it. I guess maybe she had heard from someone, somehow. They were quite confused where Stephanie would have heard it from, but they just accepted that she probably had heard it from someone, and so they gave her the details of Naryeli's funeral so that she could come along and pay her respects. But then things start to get weird, if they weren't weird already, with her just appearing on the doorstep. People began to notice Stephanie's Facebook posts popping up on their newsfeed, and these weren't any normal status updates. They were weird. They were suspicious. They were cryptic. She had posted actually just a few days before Naryeli passed away, so she was already in the spiritual center, already dangerously malnourished. She was so close to death. And Stephanie had posted, "I laugh at the living and I walk with the dead. They never fail me or lie." Naryeli's family ended up reading this status update of Stephanie's once Naryeli had already passed. So they were waiting to lay their daughter to rest, and now they are increasingly suspicious of Stephanie's involvement, perhaps. Was this status update Stephanie laughing at Naryeli's death? Her parents were now beginning to question everything, like why hadn't Stephanie bothered to visit Naryeli in this whole time that she'd been ill? It had been a couple of months, or maybe at least a full month of deterioration. Stephanie could have checked in at any point, but she only pops up on the day that Naryeli dies. All Andre could think about was that bracelet that she had seen on her daughter's wrist just before she started that rapid decline. Her mother knew that it was a curse, but she hoped that ripping it from her daughter's wrist and throwing it away, never to be seen again, she thought that could break it. But it was now seeming that it hadn't. Jose and Andre were beginning to question everything about Stephanie. Why had she made friends with their daughter? Why had she grown so close to her? And why was she only living as their neighbour for a month? A few days later was the hardest day of Andre and Jose's life. The day that they were supposed to lay Naryeli to rest. But there was one huge thing on their mind that day. Stephanie was going to be at the funeral, and she had a lot of questions to answer to. The funeral was held in what looks like a small church. All of her loved ones are gathered, they are mourning, they're crying, until Stephanie shows up. and then all hell breaks loose. In a recording shot on someone's phone, Stephanie is being interrogated. There's a group of 7 or 8 mourners that have all cornered her against a truck, and they are demanding answers. They were asking her, "What did you do to her? You laughed when you found out she was sick." And in this recording, Stephanie looks quite shaken up. She is desperately trying to tell the family that she had nothing to do with it. She had no idea that Naryeli was sick. But the family wasn't buying it. And then one family member shouts at her, "We saw what you posted on Facebook." Stephanie's desperately trying to reason with the family and get her point across, but she's very nervous. She's stuttering. She can't get her words out. It's very suspicious. They were asking her, "Where do you live now that you've moved away from our street? Where do you really live?" And again, she kind of has no proper answer to this, or at least she can't get one out of her mouth. And it really looks like they might be getting the better of her. She looks overwhelmed, overpowered. And after a while of putting pressure on Stephanie, she eventually cracks, and she answers all of their questions. So now I'm about to tell you Stephanie's twisted and evilly jealous side of the story. Stephanie had grown up only about an hour away from where Naryeli and all of her family lived, and she was born into the Santeria religion. She had practiced it her whole life. She'd been doing rituals since she was a kid. But over the past year, her reasons for channeling her religion had shifted and become a whole lot darker. Stephanie had intentionally befriended Naryeli with a plan. And that plan was to ruin her life, all because of a boy. It turned out the boy that Naryeli had been dating, do you remember I told you about that in the very beginning of the episode? It wasn't anything too serious. Well, it turns out he was also in a bit of an entanglement with Naryeli's new best friend, Stephanie. This boy had been playing both girls, dating both girls behind their backs. Now, Naryeli had no idea that the two of them were dating the same boy, but Stephanie knew, and she wasn't happy at all. She became incredibly angry and so jealous. She decided that she needed to do something to get rid of the other woman, and so she began plotting, and she tracked Naryeli down. And if you're wondering why we haven't named this little love rat that was playing these girls, it's because his identity isn't known. He is who shan't, and for the life of me, can't be named. But I do really wonder how old he was, because if you're dating a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old at the same time, what age would that make him? I mean, hopefully maybe somewhere in the middle of that? I don't know. But anyway, Stephanie found out where Naryeli lived, and she devised her plan to temporarily move into a house on the same street so that she could befriend her. Because in order to be able to get rid of Naryeli using witchcraft, Stephanie needed to be able to get close to her. She needed to have access to Naryeli's personal belongings. Stephanie confessed that during her friendship with Naryeli, she had been stealing her belongings, like right from her bedroom. And it was nothing too big, it was nothing expensive, but things like a hairbrush. She would steal all the hair out of it. Things that had Naryeli's DNA on it. Things that were very symbolic of her. I mean, I'm not into witchcraft personally, but you can imagine the kind of things that she was stealing. And she had a plan for all of these. She would sneak them out of Naryeli's home. She would take them to her own house. Then she would pile them all into mason jars and take it out to a graveyard. And there she would bury these jars of Naryeli's belongings into the dirt alongside all of these dead bodies among the graves of the dead. And this is definitely one of the darker practices that can happen within the Santeria religion. They basically believe that when you bury a person's belongings in a graveyard among the dead, that they will exchange places with the dead. It's making a deal. But the witchcraft did not end there. Stephanie was doing a lot more on these graveyard trips. She would take empty mason jars and fill them with dirt from the ground and freshly spreaded ashes. She would go scavenging in unmarked graves until she found fragments of human bones. and she would take them home for her practices. Once she had them all at home, she would grind these human bones down into a powder and mix it with the graveyard dirt, and the final step was sprinkling this corpse dust onto Naryeli's food so that she would literally be eating dead bodies. And she never had any idea that this was going on. The whole time Naryeli was alive, and even as she was becoming so sick, she never once suspected that her best friend, this woman that she really trusted, she never expected that she had been poisoning her for at least a month, if not a couple of months. Like I said, the timelines of this case are very confusing, so it was at least a full month that Naryeli was consistently consuming dead human remains alongside her food, and she was none the wiser. And it wasn't until the day of her funeral that anyone found out about this. Stephanie stood there when she was cornered by all of Naryeli's loved ones, and she confessed that yes, she had fed their daughter human corpses. Well, the bones of human corpses. Naryeli's family demanded that Stephanie go and hand herself into the police. It wasn't enough to just come clean and confess to them. She needed to be put behind bars. And surprisingly, I guess at this point, Stephanie was tired of lying, and maybe she'd been worn down by the family, but she did. She took herself off to the police station and she told them everything in detail. She even took the police to where she had buried these mason jars filled with Naryeli's belongings. She took them to that exact spot in the graveyard, dug it up, and literally handed over the evidence to the police. And maybe the reason why Stephanie was so willing and so forthcoming to police was because she knew that she wouldn't get into trouble for this. The police held her for a few hours of questioning and interviews, but then they eventually let her go. She was never to be charged, never to be convicted of what she had done. And that's because in Venezuela, the police cannot charge someone for practicing witchcraft or religious rituals. And that is what Stephanie said this was. So even if she had successfully cursed Naryeli to the point where she became so gravely ill and died, she still couldn't be charged. And I guess it kind of comes down to, it all depends what you believe in, because I'm sure there are so many of you sitting listening to this being like, witchcraft isn't real and you can't curse someone to death. I mean, I kind of believe in that shit, but I know there are a lot of people that don't, and for that exact reason is why the police can't charge for what Stephanie had supposedly done to Naryeli, because they just couldn't prove that there was a curse there. So, if Stephanie can't be arrested and proved to have killed Naryeli with witchcraft, then what else could have caused her very premature death at the age of 15? I just have to caveat these next few theories and say that the rumour mill was going crazy in this little bit of Venezuela when this case happened. Everyone had their own theories, and it gets quite messy, but we've tried to tease it all apart. There were some theories that it could have been the spiritual centre that she was sent to as a last resort, as a last hope to save her. Some people believe it was there that she died. It was those spiritual treatments that killed her. According to officials that worked on Naryeli's case, they said that they found Naryeli's body at the spiritual centre, which is the complete opposite of what we had heard before, that she had died at home in her mother's arms, surrounded by her loved ones. And this is the officials with this theory, saying that her body was found at the centre, her mum called for the emergency services to come and retrieve her body, and the officials that were alleging this version of events said that Naryeli had been held at that spiritual centre overnight for those 10 days that she was being treated. But again, that is not the story that we'd heard before. Her mother said that she never stayed over at the spiritual centre. They would just take her every day for treatments and then bring her back home, which is where she died. So you have the parents of the victim, of the deceased, claiming a completely different thing to officials, to police, and that's so confusing. So the police alleging this not only contradicts her parents' story, but it also raises a lot of questions about about how hard did her parents really try to get her medical attention between her fainting on New Year's Eve and her dying on the 11th of January. Did they really try that hard? Because for people that believe this theory and for the police that alleged it in the first place, they felt that it was a bit complacent for the family to have tried to seek medical answers on New Year's Eve, and when no doctors were available, they seemingly just kind of gave up and handed their daughter over to a spiritual centre and just kind of, I don't know, left it to be their responsibility. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that, and that theory really doesn't give Naryeli's family any grace. It doesn't make them look good at all, so let me explain. For a lot of Venezuelans, these spiritual centers and their religions and their rituals are their only source of comfort for them. They trust these religious centers and institutions more than they trust their government and government-run things like hospitals, etc. And it's not only Venezuela that feels this way. I mean, we covered a case not too long ago of the 2005 Romanian Tanaku exorcism. And that story centered a woman named Irina. She was a nun and she was experiencing a lot of mental health issues. But instead of trusting a hospital, her family more so trusted a priest and a monastery who ended up torturing her to death. In many politically unstable countries, churches often become the source of community and of trust. And in the case of Naryeli's time at the spiritual center, forensic doctors believe that her respiratory system would have really taken a knock from all of those midnight river baths. So this could possibly answer to why she died so quickly of pneumonia. But I think these theories that blame the spiritual center neglect the first 3/4 of this case, where Naryeli was losing a bunch of weight and then she stopped being able to swallow. Obviously, it had to be really bad before they took her to the spiritual center. Maybe that was what tipped her over the edge of her bad health, but she was certainly really bad before she even ended up there. Since then, that spiritual center has been closed down, and 2 of the staff that had worked on Naryeli had been arrested and questioned in connection with her death, but they were later released without charge. Both of Naryeli's parents deny that she died at the centre. Of course, they say she died in her mother's arms, and of course I believe that. I'm never gonna sit here and disagree with a family's telling of the final moments of their loved one's life. I mean, unless there's undeniable evidence, but when it's just a he said, she said kind of situation, why on earth would the family lie about that? I mean, maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle of all of that, because this case is a rather messy one. There are so many different reports. I guess it could be possible that Naryeli was at the spiritual centre and getting really, really bad to the point where her parents took her home so that she could be in the comfort of her home for her final moments. I'm not sure. It's possible. But soon, many people would be trying to get to the bottom of an even more pressing issue, asking why, after the first medical evaluation, did her family give up on medicine entirely and turn to a spiritual centre? Well, as we mentioned earlier when we spoke about the hospital, it was very understaffed, it was very busy, and that's because Venezuela is going through a lot right now, especially in its hospitals. So I'm going to give you a little bit of quick background just so that you can actually see what Naryeli and all of her family and the hospital staff would have been up against when it came to her care. Venezuela is having a major humanitarian crisis. Since 2015, 7 million people have left the country in search of meeting their basic needs. They need food and healthcare and work. And those that were still living in Venezuela at the time of Naryeli's case, and even today, are facing a really tough situation. Millions are in need of humanitarian assistance. And all of this has absolutely debilitated the healthcare system over there. There is a severe shortage of equipment, of beds, of medicine, of staff, and this is causing mortality rates to rise. One critical thing that we need to remember about Naryeli's very mysterious illness was that it came on so very quickly. Of course, on the day that she fainted on New Year's Eve, her parents did take her to the hospital. They were relying on traditional medicine, but there were no doctors available. That's not their fault. They were just so worried about her daughter. They could see how rapidly she was declining. Time was running out. And when access to medicine is so hard, and when there's other people telling you that this is obviously witchcraft, it's obviously a curse, and you live in a country where witchcraft and spirituality is so big, then I guess it makes sense that the next resort that their brain went to was a spiritual centre. I totally get why things panned out the way that they did. Of course, you're going to listen to whoever says that they can fix and save and heal your daughter the quickest. And at that point in time, it was the spiritual centres that were ready and available to take Naryeli in when the hospitals weren't. I mean, I can understand the medical negligence argument. A lot of people don't like the fact that her family only tried at the hospital once before essentially handing her over to the spiritual centre. But I don't think her parents had much choice in picking who helped to treat their daughter's very sudden illness that was literally killing her. By that point, I think I would probably let a stranger on the street try and treat my child if it meant that she had a chance of surviving. But our next theory does point more to medical negligence being to blame entirely. And I guess it wouldn't be fair to Stephanie or the religion of Santeria if I wasn't to cover these theories as well. And that is the fact that Naryeli had already been diagnosed with an illness called syncope since 2017. Syncope is a chronic medical condition where you faint a lot. And if you remember, fainting is what happened to Naryeli on New Year's Eve. That is the reason her parents had to take her to the hospital. Naryeli's mum has said that her daughter would experience a lack of oxygen in her brain, especially due to emotional things. For example, if she was going to take a test at school and she was nervous, her nerves would literally attack her and she would faint. So I guess this does trigger a lot of questions and even some doubts in Stephanie's guilt. It's alleged that since 2017, Naryeli had been losing weight due to this condition. So that's at least 2 years of weight loss before she died, which I guess could explain why she looks so malnourished. She had also been suffering from migraines. She was really unwell and she had been under the care of a family doctor. So was the New Year's Eve fainting spell due to her existing condition? I mean, it could be very likely, actually. It's possible that it could have just been a really bad fainting spell, a really dangerous one that deprived her brain of a lot of oxygen for too long, and maybe that could explain the cognitive decline that she experienced, and maybe a few of her other symptoms. But her mother claims that Naryeli was always very in control when these fainting spells would come on. She would know to get herself somewhere safe. Like, it's very rare that they would just hit her and that's it. But syncope can sometimes be a sign of a more serious underlying condition, and so it should be monitored so that proper treatment can be given when it's needed. And up until this point, that is what Naryeli and her family had been doing. They'd had a hold on her syncope. But of course, because of the situation in Venezuela, receiving immediate medical treatment when it's needed is terribly difficult, and Naryeli didn't receive it at all on New Year's Eve after her fainting spell. And although it's important to acknowledge this often untold part of Naryeli's story, because obviously it goes against all the witchcraft stuff that people want to believe, but, you know, we're always gonna tell things fair and square on this channel. We're not biased, and so I'm gonna tell you every theory. But her syncope does not seem to be the reason for her death. A lot of people think that if her syncope was that close to killing her, there would have been a lot more signs. As I was saying in the very beginning of the episode, she was a very active, very sporty, athletic girl, pretty much right up until the end. Like, surely there would have been more signs, and they would have been very debilitating, especially towards the end, if syncope had really been starving her and killing her since 2017 for 2 whole years. There would have been more signs, I'm sure. And I feel like the syncope theory, that being the biggest and sole cause of her death, is completely neglecting the fact that she was fed dead bodies. There were so many more suspicious factors at play when it came to Naryeli's death. We can't just accept the fact that it could have been just an underlying condition that did this to her when her best friend is actively plotting against her and poisoning her. And so this last theory ties all of those factors together. The current most popular theory as to how Naryeli died was that it could have been a very rare parasite that she had contracted from those shavings of human bone all over her food. And actually, if you cast your mind back to the New Year's Eve fainting spell that she had, 2 days later, she was visited by 2 doctors who did all sorts of tests, blood tests, checking her levels of different things, and I told you then that they had found something, but they didn't quite know what to make of it at the time. Well, I'm about to tell you what it was. There was one reading that didn't come back normal, and that was her neutrophil blood cells. So brace yourselves, we have Dr. Eleanor in the house. Things are about to get biological. Neutrophils are a type of white blood cell that help our bodies to fight infections. They are critical to our immune system. And these types of white blood cells are some of the first cells to respond to things like bacteria and viruses entering our body. They travel to the site of the infection and they destroy it for us. And when the doctors carried out these tests, they noticed that Naryeli's neutrophils had changed, indicating a severe bacterial infection. So, how possible is it that Naryeli fell into this state the way that we saw her in that video that her father recorded as a result of consuming human bones? Well, this has been seen before, and it's called Kuru Disease. Kuru Disease is caused by eating infectious proteins found in human brain tissue. It is incredibly rare because, well, how many people are eating infected human brain tissue? I guess it's pretty much exclusive to cannibals, but it's very, very serious and deadly. I mean, you're pretty much gonna die if you contract Kuru disease. The brain just gradually loses its function, it stops being able to swallow and walk, just like Naryeli, and then it results in death. The name Kuru comes from the word kuria, which means to shake or tremble, because that kind of describes the exact state that those with the illness are in once they've contracted it. You could see in that video of Naryeli, she was shaking uncontrollably. So I'm gonna give you a big list of the symptoms of Kuru disease and just mentally check off how many Naryeli had. The symptoms are difficulty in walking, difficulty in swallowing, muscle jerks, tremors, behavioral and mood changes, difficulty to speak. Just remember everything that we said about how she'd suddenly become so aggressive and left her mother with bruises. She had never done that before. That wasn't Naryeli. The final stage of Kuru disease is contracting pneumonia and becoming severely malnourished and eventually dying of it. And pneumonia and malnourishment were the 2 conditions that were stated in Naryeli's autopsy for causing her cardiac arrest and therefore her death. On average, Kuru disease takes about 12 months until it becomes fatal. A 12-month gradual decline where your body literally just stops working bit by bit. You stop being able to swallow, you stop being able to hold yourself up. How terrifying to live inside that when your brain is still kind of working. And while the average is usually 12 months between the date of contraction and the date that the person dies, of course, Naryeli, it happened so much quicker in her case. And there's a few theories on that. You know, she was a child, she was 15 years old, she had already lost quite a bit of weight over the couple of years before due to her syncope. She was very vulnerable, she was very weak, and this disease could have taken a hold of her system at like 2-3 times speed. So now that we know that it could have been Kuru disease, we think back to those doctors, you know, the 2 that came to visit her at the house, did all these tests, and they found that her neutrophils had changed. But would these 2 traveling doctors have the resources and the education to be able to treat such a wildly rare and unknown disease so instantly as well? I mean, probably not. That kind of thing takes a whole lab full of scientists. I mean, I hope my mum doesn't mind me saying, but she had a very rare condition a good few years ago, and it took about 3 years to actually figure out what was going on. So, I mean, I don't blame those 2 doctors that came into her house and couldn't tell from one meeting with her. Of course, at this point, no one knew that Naryeli had been consuming human bones. Why on earth would anyone suspect that? And since Kuru disease is only contracted from eating human brain tissue, like, no doctor is gonna come in and be like, well, have you been eating human brains lately? I'm sure if her family even suspected that she might have consumed anything unsafe, then they would have pushed for doctors to see her. So, some of you might be questioning, if witchcraft can't be prosecuted, surely Stephanie could still be prosecuted because she was literally poisoning Naryeli. Because, I mean, the whole witchcraft and ritual stuff aside, if they can prove that Naryeli contracted Kuru disease because she was fed these bones by Stephanie, then surely that is a crime that is convictable. But we have an issue, because around the time of Naryeli's death in 2020, COVID was fast approaching, and of course it just shut everything off for a good couple of years. And not only was everything paused and shut off, but people were dying. Like, it was such a grave and distressing few years for the whole entire world, especially for a country that is already struggling to treat their own people. You can just imagine how much worse the hospital situation got in Venezuela. So at that point in time, holding a trial between the state and the misuse of Santeria practices would have just resulted in so much more chaos that they didn't need right now. Not only were they going through COVID, they were going through political instability, a humanitarian crisis, and this would have been a very controversial case that I think the authorities would have rather not got into. Because I imagine a trial like that to try to prosecute the misuse of Santeria practices, it'd just be like opening Pandora's box. There would be so many arguments between different religious groups and their practices and what's defendable and what's not. There would probably need to be changes to the law in order to arrest Stephanie, and Venezuela just couldn't deal with any added stress and chaos in that time period. Which, while we're on the topic of the crisis in Venezuela, I do want to take a minute to highlight a wonderful charity called Healing Venezuela. They have been tackling the healthcare collapse that we have talked so much about today by increasing access to doctors and clean water and food for vulnerable citizens. They are really doing their best to help alleviate as much suffering as possible. Healing Venezuela does amazing and critical work, and if you want to find out more, and please donate, the link will be in the description of this episode. To this day, even though Naryeli's death is ruled as natural causes, no one really believes that. I mean, her own family believes that Stephanie is to blame. The whole internet is convinced that Stephanie is to blame. I mean, it's just so evil to think about how premeditated this crime was if she was really guilty of doing all of this. Stephanie chose a house on Naryeli's street and moved in with the plan to befriend her and ruin her life. Stephanie got to know Naryeli and her hopes, her dreams, her fears, what she likes, what she doesn't like, and still none of it softened her. Still, she kept scheming and plotting and poisoning her with human bones until she died. That is everything we have for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means the world to me and all of the team. And thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring this episode. Remember, you can download it for free right now on iOS and Android. Go click the link in the description, or you can scan the QR code on screen. Oh my god, my kitty! Hi, kitty! If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up or a comment down below. If you engage with the video, that is a free way that you can support the work that we do. And who doesn't love free stuff, eh? If you want to watch another video of ours, there'll be one on screen right now, or if you click the circle with my face in it, then you can subscribe to this channel and make sure you put your bell notifications on so you never miss when we upload a new episode. Also, if you didn't know, we have these available in podcast form, so if you're an audio kind of gal, hit us up on your favourite podcast platform. But with all that being said, bye!